When the astronomer CEO was caught live on a concert kiss cam with his HR chief, the board saw a scandal. His wife saw a $1.7 billion opening. This is how a private betrayal became a very public takedown. This isn't a story about a broken heart. It's a forensic case study in power, betrayal, and the exact moment a spouse stops being a victim and starts being a strategist. When your entire life is entangled with a billionaire's empire, how do you extract justice or vengeance without destroying your own future in the process? The answer lies in a calculated sequence that began not with lawyers, but with a single, silent decision to weaponize his public image against his private sins. The foundation of their empire wasn't built on love, but on a meticulously crafted brand. The visionary tech founder and his philanthropic wife, the perfect public partnership. For 15 years, she wasn't just his spouse. She was the quiet architect of his respectable image, the buffer between his ruthless business instincts and the world. And that gave her an intimate map of every single vulnerability. His name was Robert Thorne, founder and CEO of Axiom Dynamics, a cloud infrastructure titan valued at over $80 billion. Hers was Alina Thorne, an interior designer by training who had strategically refashioned herself into the chair of their foundation, the serene face at every charity gala. Their public story was one of mutual ambition. The private reality, as she would later describe in sealed depositions, was a slowly freezing wasteland. The affair didn't start with a bang, but with a pattern of anomalies she was uniquely positioned to notice. The new executive assistant, Chloe, hired in 2023, was suddenly on every business trip to Zurich and Singapore. Her security clearance, unusually high for her role. The discreet credit card charges, a hotel in Napa where Robert was supposedly at a board retreat, a jewelry purchase from a boutique he'd never shown interest in before. Alina's first move wasn't confrontation. It was forensic. She hired a discreet team, not of private investigators, but of forensic accountants and digital risk analysts. She needed data, not drama. What they found was a blueprint of betrayal, not just of their marriage, but of corporate governance. Robert wasn't just sleeping with a subordinate. He had moved Chloe's brother into a key finance role, approved massive bonuses for her department, and most critically, had used a subsidiary's discretionary fund to pay for their liaisons. Community funds. In the cold language of divorce law, that changed everything. This wasn't just heartbreak. It was a breach of fiduciary duty, a potential shareholder lawsuit waiting to happen. Alina understood the statistics. Men in Robert's position, where 18% admit to infidelity, often operate with a sense of invincibility. The workplace affair is the most common because it's convenient, but they rarely consider the corporate policy violations, the weapon it gives a prepared spouse. She sat on the evidence for weeks, watching him, her silence a calculated weapon. He mistook it for ignorance, for the passive acceptance he expected. The turning point came on the night of July 12, 2025. Robert was distant, preparing for a client dinner. Alina was tracking his phone location, a habit born not of jealousy but of strategy. It showed him at a high-end restaurant downtown. Then a notification pinged on her tablet, a tagged photo from a friend. Saw Robert at the Coldplay concert. Looks like he's having a blast. The attached image was grainy but unmistakable. There he was in a luxury box, not with clients, but with Chloe. And the stadium's kiss cam was panning right toward them. In that suspended second, as the image went viral on social media within minutes, Alina faced a binary choice. She could be the humiliated wife, the object of pity, or she could be the architect of consequence. She chose the latter. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She picked up her phone and made 3 calls. The first was to her chief of security, instructing him to change the passcodes on their primary residence and the wine cellar vault containing his private documents. The second was to her lawyer, saying only, "The concert footage is public. Initiate Phase 1. The third was to the chair of Axiom's board, a man she'd cultivated for a decade with whom she'd served on the foundation's board. Her message was calm, lethal in its professionalism. "Alan, You've likely seen the viral video. For the sake of the company's valuation and to preempt a hostile media cycle, I suggest you convene an emergency meeting. I have documentation pertaining to Robert's misuse of corporate resources that you will need to see. She then did something supremely symbolic. She logged into her public social media accounts and meticulously removed Thorne from every profile, reverting to her maiden name, Elena Vance. She didn't post a statement. She didn't block him. She simply erased his name from her digital identity. The silent edit screamed louder than any rant. While the internet exploded with memes of the CEO Kisscam scandal, the board was in panic mode. Elena's package arrived. Not just evidence of the affair, but a neatly compiled dossier tracing company funds to personal trysts, highlighting the nepotism with Chloe's brother, and citing the exact clauses in the company's ethics charter that had been violated. It wasn't emotional. It was a corporate coup proposal. Robert, blindsided by the speed and precision of it, stumbled home near dawn to find his keycards inactive. A security guard handed him an envelope. Inside was a temporary restraining order based on the misuse of marital assets, and a notice that the family's legal team had filed an emergency motion to freeze certain joint accounts. His personal world had been locked down as efficiently as a hostile server takeover. He called her, fury and disbelief in his voice. "Elena, what the hell is this? We can talk about this." Her response was quiet, final. "We just did. Your lawyer will be in touch with mine. Do not contact me again." The phone went dead. The man who commanded $80 billion in market cap had just been outmaneuvered in his own home. But this was only the opening move, the public shock and awe. Elena's real objective wasn't just a favorable divorce settlement. It was the one thing Robert valued above his mistress, above his wife, perhaps above anything else: his control of Axiom Dynamics. She knew the board was now terrified. A scandal involving funds was a lawsuit magnet. Shareholders would revolt. The only way to stabilize the company would be to sacrifice the CEO. As the sun rose the next morning, with Robert holed up in a hotel and Chloe placed on immediate administrative leave, the board voted unanimously to accept Robert Thorne's resignation. The press release cited a desire to pursue other interests. The financial networks reported it as damage control. But Elena, sitting in her now quiet study, knew the truth. She had just dethroned a billionaire with a Kisscam photo and a spreadsheet. Phase 1 was complete. Yet for Elena Vance, this wasn't victory. It was merely the end of the prelude. The divorce would be the real war, a conflict fought not over hearts but over decimals, asset valuations, and corporate shares. Robert, now humiliated and furious, would leverage his entire arsenal to protect his fortune. And he had one devastating card left to play: a prenuptial agreement signed 15 years earlier, a document Elena had quietly spent the last 6 months having her legal team dissect, searching for a single, fatal flaw. Her lead attorney's email flashed on her screen that afternoon. The subject line: "Prenup analysis, urgent finding." Her hand hovered over the mouse. The entire chessboard of their future, the difference between walking away with a consolation prize or claiming her rightful half of an empire, hinged on what was in this message. She took a breath and clicked open, unaware that the clause she was about to read would trigger a legal battle so vicious. It would redefine the very meaning of revenge in the billionaire class. The prenuptial agreement, signed in a rush of early optimism, contained a standard infidelity clause. But Elena's lawyers found its fatal flaw: it only triggered if she was unfaithful. Robert's misconduct was never contemplated, rendering the entire document void in California, a community property state. With one legal opinion, the playing field was leveled. Robert's safe harbor had vanished, and the real war for half of everything began. Elena's legal team, a boutique firm specializing in high-net-worth divorce, moved with military precision. The initial filing wasn't just a petition for dissolution. It was a 70-page asset inventory and a request for temporary spousal support so substantial it made headlines. $350,000 per month. The figure wasn't arbitrary. It was calculated to match the lifestyle established during the marriage, the private jets, the security details, the seven-figure charity donations made in their joint name. It was also a psychological blow, a public bill for his betrayal. Robert's response was a furious counterattack. He hired the most aggressive litigation firm in the city, known for dragging out proceedings to bankrupt the less-moneyed spouse. His first move was to portray Alina as a gold digger who had contributed nothing to Axiom's success. He filed a motion to reduce her support request to a reasonable $20,000 a month, claiming her true role was that of a socialite, not a partner. The tabloids, fed by his PR team, spun a new narrative, the vengeful wife exploiting a momentary mistake. But Alina was prepared for this. Her lawyers submitted a supplemental declaration to the court. It wasn't an emotional rebuttal. It was a business portfolio. It contained records of her work redesigning Axiom's headquarters, a project that boosted employee retention and was featured in architectural digests. It included logs of her management of their complex philanthropic network, which had provided Robert with crucial political and social capital. Most damningly, it featured sworn statements from former Axiom board members crediting Alina with softening Robert's abrasive personality for key investor meetings. Her argument was cold and modern. She had been the chief reputation officer of the Thorn brand, and her labor had direct, measurable financial value. The judge, overseeing what was now dubbed the Billionaire's divorce, granted Alina 80% of her requested temporary support. It was a stunning, early victory. The message was clear. The court would not dismiss the non-monetary contributions of a spouse. Robert was ordered to pay $280,000 a month, immediately, while also covering all legal fees for both sides pending final settlement. He was now financing the army that was besieging him. This is where the battle moved from the courtroom to the balance sheet. In a high-net-worth divorce, the marital estate isn't just houses and cars. It's a labyrinth of holding companies, offshore trusts, stock options, intellectual property, and deferred compensation. Robert, like many founders, owned his Axiom shares through a complex web of entities designed for control and tax efficiency. Unraveling what was truly community property, grown during the marriage versus his separate property, from before would be the multi-million-dollar question. Alina's team deployed forensic accountants. Their mission: trace the growth of every asset from the date of marriage. They discovered that while Robert founded Axiom before their wedding, its valuation then was a mere $12 million, a promising startup. Its explosive growth to $80 billion happened entirely during their 15-year marriage. Under California law, the asterisk appreciation of that separate property could be considered community, depending on his active involvement. And Robert hadn't just been involved. He was the company. This legal theory meant Alina could claim a portion of the astronomical growth, potentially worth tens of billions. Robert's team countered with a terrifying alternative. They threatened to litigate the valuation into the ground. They argued that Axiom's current market cap was inflated, a bubble of hype. If forced to buy Alina out, they said, he'd have to sell so many shares it would crash the stock, destroying value for everyone, including her. It was a classic doomsday threat, the mutual assured destruction of the marital estate. But Alina had anticipated this too. She didn't want a fire sale of Axiom stock. She wanted a clean, strategic exit. Her lawyers proposed a radical solution. Instead of a messy fight over the publicly traded shares, she would take her share of the community estate in the form of their other assets, the private equity investments, the commercial real estate portfolio, the venture capital fund he controlled, and one specific crown jewel, their Napa Valley vineyard and winery, a passion project Alina had personally built into a prestigious, profitable brand. It was worth an estimated $200 million, a mere fraction of the whole, but it was tangible, controllable, and utterly symbolic. Robert scoffed at the proposal. The vineyard was his trophy, the playground for entertaining clients. He refused. The negotiations, conducted in sterile conference rooms over 16-hour days, ground to a bitter stalemate. The personal vitriol seeped into the process. Robert's lawyers began subpoenaing Alina's personal spending from the last decade, trying to paint her as profligate. They demanded evaluations of her jewelry, her art collection, even the value of the designer clothes in her closet. The divorce was becoming a humiliating, microscopic inventory of their life. Then Robert played a dirty card. A mysterious source began leaking stories to the press about Alina's own close friendship with a prominent art dealer, implying her own infidelity. The stories were vague, salacious, and legally deniable, but their purpose wasn't to win in court. It was to win in the court of public opinion, to muddy the waters of her wronged wife narrative and pressure her to settle. Alina's response was not a denial to the press. It was a legal missile. Her lawyers filed a motion for sanctions against Robert and his counsel, accusing them of a campaign of harassment and bad faith litigation tactics designed solely to intimidate. As part of the motion, they included a shocking piece of evidence: internal emails from Robert's own PR firm, discussing the strategy of planting the affair rumors to soften her up for settlement. The judge was furious. Sanctions were granted, and Robert was ordered to pay another $2 million toward Alina's legal fees. His smear campaign had backfired spectacularly, proving to the court that he was the vindictive party. Yet the core financial deadlock remained. Alina's forensic accountants, digging deeper, hit a wall. There were discrepancies in the records of Robert's private investment fund. Certain transactions, loans made to shell companies, didn't have clear paper trails. They suspected asset dissipation, the deliberate hiding or wasting of marital funds. They requested a full audit, overseen by a neutral third-party expert appointed by the court. Robert fought this tooth and nail, claiming proprietary business secrets. The legal skirmish over the audit took months. Finally, the judge ordered it to proceed, but within a tightly controlled confidentiality ring. The neutral auditor, a former FBI forensic accountant, was given access to the innermost financial sanctums. For 6 weeks, Alina heard nothing. The silence was agonizing. Her entire strategy hinged on finding the hidden leverage, the secret pressure point Robert valued more than the vineyard, more than his pride. Then her lead attorney called, his voice tense with urgency. The auditor had found something, but it wasn't hidden cash or a secret account. It was something more explosive, a connection that tied Robert's personal misconduct directly to a massive, unreported corporate liability. The auditor's preliminary finding suggested that the loans to shell companies weren't just hiding personal wealth. They were potentially covering up a serious regulatory violation within Axiom itself, a brewing scandal that could dwarf the Kisscam affair. Alina was presented with a new, terrifyingly powerful piece on the chessboard. Using this information in the divorce would be a nuclear option. It could force Robert to surrender everything she asked for to keep it quiet. But it could also trigger a government investigation, collapse Axiom stock, and vaporize the very fortune she was fighting for. She had to choose: leverage the information for a swift, private settlement, or expose it and risk total financial annihilation for them both. As she reviewed the auditor's cryptic summary, a single line jumped out. It referenced a series of payments routed through an entity in the Cayman Islands, an entity named Prometheus Holdings. That name rang a distant bell. She'd seen it before, years ago, scribbled in the margin of a document in Robert's home office safe. A safe whose new combination, she realized with a cold chill, she still knew. The path to a decision, and to an even greater revelation, now led back into the heart of the home she had locked him out of. The safe opened with a familiar, soft click. Inside, tucked behind old passports, was a single manila folder. The document within wasn't a financial ledger. It was a signed, confidential settlement agreement from 5 years earlier between Axiom Dynamics and a tiny cybersecurity firm called Sentinel Labs. The subject: the cover-up of a catastrophic data breach that had never been disclosed to the public or to regulators. And Robert had used Prometheus Holdings, a shell company funded with marital assets, to funnel the $20 million hush money payment. Alina stood frozen in the silent office, the paper trembling in her hands. This wasn't just hidden money. This was a felony: corporate fraud, securities violation, obstruction. The auditor's cryptic finding now made horrifying sense. The shell company loans weren't about hiding wealth from her. They were about hiding evidence from the federal government. And she, through their community property, had unknowingly helped bankroll the cover-up. Her lawyers, upon seeing the document, went from aggressive to solemn. The calculus had changed entirely. They explained the doctrine of innocent spouse relief, but it was complex. If the government came knocking, she could be dragged into years of litigation, her assets frozen. The divorce judge, if made aware, might even pause proceedings, leaving her financially stranded. Robert hadn't just betrayed their marriage. He had potentially entangled her in a federal crime. The leverage was now thermonuclear. Confronting Robert with it privately risked him destroying evidence or fabricating a story that implicated her. Taking it directly to the divorce court risked triggering the very regulatory avalanche they needed to avoid. There was a third path, her lead attorney suggested, one that required perfect timing and nerves of steel. They would use the threat of exposure not to destroy Robert, but to force a global settlement so favorable, so absolute, that he would have no choice but to accept. They would make him pay for her silence and for his freedom. A clandestine meeting was arranged at a neutral law firm's offices. No assistants, no secondary lawyers. Just Robert, his lead counsel, Alina, and hers. The atmosphere was glacial. Robert glared, confident he still held the upper hand through sheer financial inertia. Alina's lawyer didn't mention the safe or the document. He simply slid a new, one-page term sheet across the table. It listed 5 non-negotiable points. 1. Alina receives full ownership of the Napa Valley Vineyard and Winery, free of debt. 2. She receives a one-time lump sum cash settlement of $900 million, transferred within 30 days. 3. She retains full ownership of all real estate properties currently in her name, plus their New York penthouse. 4. All art, jewelry, and personal effects remain with their current holder, no further inventory. 5. A binding, mutual non-disparagement clause, and a release of all claims, known and unknown, against each other. Robert laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "You've lost your minds. That's over $1 billion in value. I'd rather burn it in litigation for a decade." It was then that Alina's lawyer slid a second piece of paper across the table. It was a photocopy of the signature page of the Sentinel Labs settlement with the Prometheus Holdings routing number highlighted. "We believe the alternative," her lawyer said quietly, "would be significantly more costly for everyone." Robert's face drained of color. He stared at the page, then at Alina, a mixture of utter shock and venomous betrayal. He had not considered that his securest vault had been his own home, or that the wife he'd underestimated held its key. His lawyer, confused, leaned in to look. After a minute of whispered consultation, Robert's defiance crumpled into a stunned, calculating silence. They requested a recess. 2 hours later, they returned. Robert's counterproposal was predictable. He would agree to the terms, but only if Alina also signed an airtight, expanded confidentiality agreement, swearing never to disclose any asterisk information about Axiom's internal affairs, with punitive damages in the billions. He was trying to lock the secret back in its box. Alina's team agreed, but with a crucial, surgically added condition. The confidentiality would only apply to corporate matters. Her right to speak about their personal relationship, the affair, the divorce, the story of Alina Vance, remained entirely her own. She would give him legal safety, but she would keep her narrative sovereignty. Robert, cornered, had to accept. The drafting of the final settlement took 72 frantic hours, but as the teams worked, a new problem emerged: the $900 million liquidity requirement. To pay Alina, Robert would need to sell a massive block of Axiom shares, which would require filing a public disclosure with the Securities and Exchange Commission. The sale would be visible, and the market would wonder why the ousted CEO was suddenly dumping stock. Analysts would dig. Questions could lead back to the very secrets they were trying to bury. A solution, both brilliant and risky, was devised. Robert would use a combination of margin loans against his remaining stock and discreet sales through a network of private buyers to raise the cash, avoiding a single large public filing. It was legal, but it was precarious, stretching his financial architecture to its limits. The entire settlement now balanced on a series of perfectly timed, secretive financial maneuvers. The day before the final documents were to be signed before the judge, Alina received an encrypted message. It was from a number she didn't recognize. It contained no text, only a link to a private video feed. With a sense of dread, she clicked. The feed showed a live shot of a modest suburban home, the home of Chloe, the former executive assistant. Parked outside was a car she recognized as belonging to a particularly ruthless tabloid journalist. Robert's final, petty act of revenge was not against her, but against his former mistress. He was feeding her to the wolves, ensuring the media cycle had a new victim to devour, distracting from his own financial maneuvers. It was a stark, chilling reminder of the man she was dealing with. He would always seek to dominate, to punish. His signature on a piece of paper wouldn't change that. As she watched the video feed, a new, chilling question formed. If he was willing to sacrifice Chloe so easily, what other loose ends might he decide to tie up once this settlement was sealed? Was a signature truly the end, or just the end of one chapter in a longer, darker story? The morning of the final hearing arrived. The courtroom was closed to the public. The mood was tense but exhausted. The judge reviewed the massive settlement decree, a document that would redistribute over $1 billion in assets and bind two people to a lifetime of silence on specific matters. As Alina stood to affirm her agreement, she looked across at Robert. His gaze was not on her, but on his lawyer's tablet, watching the real-time movement of Axiom's stock price. Even now, at the finish line, it was the only thing that truly held his attention. The judge's gavel fell. It was done. Alina Vance was now one of the wealthiest self-made women in the country, at least on paper. The vineyard was hers. The money would soon be wired. The legal war was over. As she walked out of the courthouse into the blinding sunlight, a strange emptiness mingled with the relief. The fight had defined her for over a year. Now she had won. But Robert's final act of cruelty against Chloe played in her mind. And the secret of the Sentinel breach, now legally silenced but ethically festering, sat in a vault with her lawyer. She had secured her future, but she was walking away handcuffed to a secret that could still detonate. 2 weeks later, the first installment of the cash settlement hit her accounts. The transfer was flawless, invisible. Robert had kept his first promise. She began the work of assuming control of the vineyard, losing herself in the tangible details of soil and vines. For a few weeks, there was peace. Then, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, her phone rang. It was her security chief. His voice was tight. "Alina, you need to see this. It's about Axiom." On the financial news network, a ticker flashed red. Axiom Dynamics stock was plunging, down 18% in pre-market trading. The Chiron headline read, WHISTLEBLOWERALLEGES undisclosed data breach AT Axiom, SEC inquiry reported. The secret was out, but not from her. Someone else had talked. The carefully constructed wall of confidentiality agreements had just been blown apart from the outside. And the fallout would land, not in the sterile world of divorce court, but in the furious, public arena of federal regulators and shareholder lawsuits. The battle for money was over. The war for survival was about to begin for both of them. The whistleblower wasn't a disgruntled employee or a hacker. It was the source Robert himself had created, Chloe, the former executive assistant. Abandoned by the media and blacklisted from her industry, she had taken the one piece of hard evidence she'd kept as insurance, a recorded conversation detailing the breach cover-up, and sent it to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Robert's attempt to destroy a loose end had turned it into a guided missile, and it was now aimed directly at the heart of his empire. The SEC inquiry quickly escalated to a formal investigation. Subpoenas flew. Axiom stock, already wounded, went into freefall, losing 40% of its value in a month. Shareholder class action lawsuits materialized overnight, alleging securities fraud for failing to disclose a material event. The board, desperate to contain the damage, threw Robert under the bus entirely, issuing public statements of shock and commissioning an independent internal review. For Robert, the financial engineering he'd used to pay Alina now became a death spiral. The margin loans were called. The private buyers for his stock vanished. He was forced to conduct emergency, massive sales of Axiom shares into a collapsing market, driving the price down further and vaporizing his net worth. The $900 million he'd paid Alina weeks earlier now represented a catastrophic liquidity drain. He was trapped in a financial feedback loop of his own making. Alina watched the carnage from the sanctuary of her vineyard. Her position, however, was legally insulated. The divorce settlement was final and contained a full release of claims. Her assets were separate property now. The SEC had no cause of action against her, especially as forensic tracing showed the Prometheus Holdings money had moved from marital funds to cover up the breach, not the other way around. She was, in the eyes of the law, a victim of his concealment as well. But the ethical weight remained. She owned her silence. Robert's lawyers, frantic, reached out, not with threats but with a plea. They urged her to make a joint statement of support for Axiom to help stabilize the stock. The unspoken offer, future financial consideration, a renegotiation. It was a trap. Any coordinated statement could be construed as further conspiracy. Alina's lawyers advised absolute public radio silence. She instead made one strategic, unilateral move. She donated $5 million, a trivial amount from her settlement, to a nonprofit focused on cybersecurity ethics and data privacy rights. The press release made no mention of Axiom or Robert. It simply stated her belief in corporate transparency and user protection. The message was read perfectly by the media. The ex-wife was funding the very principles her ex-husband had violated. It was a masterclass in reputation alchemy, transforming her from a divorcee into a conscience. The legal dominoes fell with brutal efficiency. The SEC filed civil fraud charges against Robert and Axiom Dynamics, seeking massive fines. The Department of Justice opened a parallel criminal investigation. Robert's legal team, the best money could buy, began a grinding, desperate defense. But the evidence, especially Chloe's recording, was devastating. Facing the prospect of a trial and possible prison time, Robert entered negotiations for a plea deal. 8 months after the whistleblower report, a settlement was announced. Robert pled guilty to 1 count of securities fraud. Axiom Dynamics paid a fine of $900 million to the SEC. Robert was sentenced to 28 months in a minimum security prison, fined $50 million personally, and banned from serving as an officer or director of a public company for 10 years. His reputation was ash. His fortune, decimated by fines, legal fees, and the collapsed stock, was a fraction of its former glory. Alina, meanwhile, was not just surviving, she was building. She rebranded the vineyard as Vance Family Wines, emphasizing legacy and stewardship. The business flourished, its narrative of female rebirth and integrity resonating in the market. She expanded the philanthropic arm, focusing on women's economic empowerment, a subtle but pointed contrast to her past. She was no longer Mrs. Thorne. She was Alina Vance, vintner and philanthropist. The final, surprising detail emerged not in a courtroom, but in a sealed post-sentencing report. The judge, in determining Robert's sentence, had considered a victim impact statement, not from shareholders or clients, from Alina Vance. In her statement, she did not speak of her own pain or betrayal. She wrote about the systemic damage caused by the breach's cover-up, the erosion of public trust in technology, the real-world harm to individuals whose data was compromised. She framed the crime not as a personal wrong against her, but but as a societal one. Legal analysts noted the statement's clinical, powerful tone likely influenced the judge to impose a sentence on the higher end of the guideline range. Her revenge was not just financial. It was to bear witness, officially and permanently, to the full scale of his moral failure. 3 years after the Kisscam scandal, the trajectories were fixed. Robert served his sentence, emerged to a diminished life of private investments and obscurity. The affair with Chloe, the catalyst for it all, was a forgotten footnote. Alina's net worth, anchored by the wisely invested settlement and the growing value of her brand, was estimated at over $1.2 billion. More importantly, she controlled her narrative, her time, and her legacy. The central promise of the hook, the story of a spouse who saw a billion-dollar opening in a moment of humiliation, was fulfilled. But the true payoff was more profound than money. It was agency. Alina had navigated the brutal statistics where most marriages shatter after infidelity, and she had done so not by fighting for the relationship, but by fighting for herself. She used the tools of his world, forensic accounting, legal strategy, public perception, not to win him back, but to win herself free. She proved that in the high-stakes divorce of a billionaire, the real power isn't in the emotional reaction, but in the strategic response. The tears he expected would have been a liability. The revenge he got was a meticulously executed plan that transformed his betrayal into her foundation. The story ends not with a reconciliation, but with a quiet evening at the vineyard. Alina Vance walks through her rows of grapes, the setting sun painting the hills gold, the silence around her not empty but full of peace. The battle is over, the future entirely her own. So what does the fall of a billionaire really tell us? Beyond the headlines about 9-figure settlements and prison sentences, this story reveals a fundamental shift in the architecture of power. For decades, the narrative was simple. The wealthy and connected were insulated, protected by layers of money and influence from the consequences of their personal actions. Alina Vance's story dismantles that assumption piece by piece. Her victory wasn't a fluke. It was a case study in modern leverage. She understood that in the 21st century, a CEO's personal brand and a company's market value are inextricably linked. A viral scandal isn't just embarrassment, it's a systemic vulnerability. She understood that corporate governance documents and ethics clauses aren't just paperwork, they're potential weapons when violated. Most importantly, she recognized that in a community property state, the spouse isn't an outsider to the fortune. They are a legal partner to its entirety, with all the investigative rights that entails. This reframes the entire concept of the wronged spouse. The power isn't in the emotional reaction, but in the forensic one. The tears he expected were a dead end. The cold, strategic patience he got was a catalyst. The statistics are clear. Only about a third of marriages survive discovered infidelity. But this story asks a different question. For those that don't survive, what comes after the rupture? Is it just a division of assets, or can it be a reclamation of an entire identity? The lingering question is whether Alina won. She unequivocally did. It's whether her path is replicable. She had access to elite legal counsel, forensic accountants, and security teams. She had the insider knowledge that comes from 15 years at the epicenter of the empire. This blueprint requires resources to execute. It makes you wonder, in a less moneyed, less public betrayal, where does the leverage come from? Is justice in these intimate wars still only for those who can afford the artillery? Ultimately, this isn't just a tale of revenge, it's a lesson in agency. Alina moved from being a character in Robert's story, the supportive wife, the philanthropic accessory, to being the author of her own. She used the tools of his world not to become like him, but to become free of him. The vineyard, the foundation, the new name, they aren't just assets. They are statements of intent. The final, sobering truth is that both of their lives were permanently altered by choices made in intimacy. His choice to betray and hers to calculate. One choice led to a prison cell and a shattered legacy. The other led to a sunset over a vineyard and a legacy she controls. In the end, the greatest revenge wasn't taking his money or his freedom. It was demonstrating, utterly and completely, that he had underestimated her. And in that miscalculation, he lost everything, while she gained herself. The dance of power in relationships is eternal, but the steps are constantly evolving. The next time you see a headline about a scandal in the corner office, look beyond the shock. Look for the quiet strategist in the background, the one who knows where the real leverage lies. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in a billionaire's life isn't a rival CEO or a government regulator. It's the person who knows where he keeps his secrets and exactly what they're worth.